at All Points TV. I'm George. I'm also the host of the program that comes on at 2 o'clock at this network, and we're here from 2 o'clock to 3 every Monday without exception. And when we cannot be here live, we'll do a taping, which is very rare, but when we're out of the country or on some other business, we will make sure that the program goes forward. We can't cancel the program, but we're becoming more popular now than ever before. We weren't canceling when we didn't have any viewers. We have to start somewhere. And now that we're off the ground floor, we on let's see where we now. We're probably on the top of the first floor. We're right there between the first floor and the second floor. And we are going to go up to, how many floors we're going to have here? We're going to have 10 floors. So we're not on the ground floor at the ground level anymore. We're now at at what you would call the ceiling of the first floor. And so we're not going to be able to get away with stopping now. We got too much we've been building up over the last 14 years. It's hard to believe we've been doing this program for 14 years. But 14 years and counting. We're not going anywhere, so just stay tuned. And we're going to continue to try to say some things that nobody else is saying. And I'll tell you something, when it comes down to the Constitution, there's a lot of stuff they're not saying. And also, on the other side of that, the reverse of that is a lot of things they're saying, and you scholars, you listen, a lot of things that they're saying, I don't know where they're getting this stuff from, but look, I'm trained in this area. I tell you something, I'm shocked at a lot of things that I'm hearing, and I'm gonna take them on publicly because some of these people got to stop talking. And they're saying all kinds of things that are just misleading the public and making statements outlandish. I guess because of the institution they work or have worked at, and they have some credentials based upon the status of the institution, and that's only about the endowment of the institution. It has nothing to do with the fact that they've had necessarily the top scholars there. But a lot of things that are being said here have got to be challenged. I'm going to be making some points today that have to do with what is happening now, very problematical of what's happening now as it relates to the 45th President of the United States, and looks like the 47th President the way it's going. And they're panicking in Washington because they're doing everything they can because they can see the handwriting on the wall. There's just nobody over there. They can claim what they want to. There's nobody over there in the Democratic Party that can stand up to Trump, and as quiet as it kept, Joe Biden is stand up to Trump in 2020. And certainly Kamala Harris, and now I'm reading about her saying that she's ready to stand up in the presidency if she has to. So that means that there's some rumblings going on in the background about whether or not Joe Biden would be there as a candidate in 2024. His poll numbers are such right now that I know there's some discussion that'll be taking place. They can't possibly think they're going to pull this again about this man winning more votes than anybody's ever won in the history of the presidency of the United States. That cannot fly again given what we now see in these polls. And they're saying that Donald Trump would have a problem beating Joe Biden, and the polling is very close between the two of them. That's not true. And I don't know what polls they're looking at, but now look at the polls I'm looking at, and I don't see any of that. I don't even think that the blue states would vote for more of what they're getting right now. But I wanted to come to the studio today to talk about some of the things that are happening in this country that have no constitutional standing. And I'm just have to tell you up front, when I'm talking about the Constitution in this country, I'm not going to take a back seat to anybody that's out there in the public eye. And a lot of them, I don't know why they're saying some of the things they're saying, but some of the things that are being talked about out here in the public domain these people have got to stop. You can't say things like, you can't say things like Lawrence Tribe made a statement. I don't know if he's saying it now, but maybe he's not saying it now. But to have said it at any point raises eyebrows, and raises my eyebrows, because you can't say that impeachment has not occurred until the matter of impeachment is referred to the Senate for trial, because you see that goes to another level of the check and balance system. See, what I'm teaching here is that where they learn in school that the separation of powers is a vertical, is a horizontal separation. What I mean by horizontal, they're talking about Articles 1, 2, and 3. So then Article 1 sets up the legislative branch of government, and then Article 2 sets up the executive branch, and then the third branch, of course, is the judicial branch of government. And the three separate branches are separated by the powers they're allowed to wield based upon the Constitution. So they say that that's the separation of powers. But really the separation of powers is how the entire document operates. And inside of the legislative branch, if you read it carefully, you'll see how it's segmented, so that within the Congress itself, or the legislative branch of government, that the powers are even separated therein. And so it's really a travesty for anybody to say that impeachment, which is a protocol that is allowed exclusively to the House. And when I say exclusive to the House, it means that no other branch of government, not even another part of the Congress, can exercise the power that's directly assigned and specifically assigned to the House of Representatives after they have, in fact, brought about impeachment, which is the official accusation of wrongdoing while the person is in office. And I will add here that it has to be a charge made while the person is in office. Once the person leaves office, then that charge cannot be brought, because he's no longer an officer of the United States, as required by Article 2, Section 4. So the separation of powers, even inside of the Congress, is a divvying up the powers that's assigned to the House and powers assigned to the Senate. Even those powers are separated. So it is not just, and then that I'm still talking here about a horizontal separation, but the powers are also separated vertically, because this is, and this shows me something about the framers, these tremendous framers that we have. I'm really I'm floored by the lack of contradictory. There's no contradictions in the Constitution, where one part of it contradicts another part, and how they're able to do that with 55 members in that room at some point. They weren't all there at the beginning, they weren't all there at the end, but somewhere along the lines, there are all 55 of them there. And it's just amazing how you can get 55 people in a room and they have a seamless document they created. I'm still overwhelmed by the fact that you look at the different parts of the original Constitution, 7 articles as it were at that time, and no part contradicts the other part. And I'm the person that's been on a lot of committees in my educational career. I served on a lot of committees. Some of them in Lansing, and you know how you this committee meets over here and this committee meets over there, and you come back together as a whole group at some point and try to put the whole thing that you've been working on together. That's very hard to do, because in different corridors where you're dividing up the work, coming back together and then make it seamless from separate places that is actually developed is a very difficult thing to do. And I have had some difficulties in bringing that about. And when I look at the Constitution, where I see that being done and how seamless it is, it lets me see again what Ayn Rand is talking about, where she talks about how these were the first intellectuals, and so far, as of her death in 1982, at the date of her departure, she was saying that the framers were the country's first intellectual, and so far, his last intellectuals, and she never changed her mind. In the 77 years that she lived, she never said at the end of her life where that stopped being true. And beyond that point, from 1982 to the present time, I don't see any reason to say that it's different now than it was at the time that she made the statement, because I just can't consider the people that's out here right now in academia and these television scholars, which is what I consider these other scholars to be. A lot of them is on television all the time. You can almost tell who's been endorsed by the establishment by who's on television, because some of the scholars are not put on television. They don't put on TV John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, for example. I never see him on television. And those scholars that I've been calling out here on this program, that they're on TV all the time, I don't know why they're on there. I don't see the expertise they have about the Constitution, what they're saying. And Lawrence Tribe needs to go somewhere and sit down immediately what he's talking about. Even Alan Dershowitz challenges Lawrence Tribe. I think they have an animosity somewhere along the line, both of them being Harvard and some one upmanship that goes on there. But I notice that Alan Dershowitz makes a lot of comments about Lawrence Tribe. But Alan Dershowitz is not all that sharp about the Constitution either. And there are comments he's made that what he's saying is not true either. I just don't think that there are many constitutional scholars in this country. And to be honest with you, I don't see any of them on television, because what they're saying on well, look, y'all, what they're saying on TV, some of this stuff, I mean, they can get away with it because they're talking to a layman. I'm not a layman. And some of the things they're saying is abhorrent given what the framers put in place. Don't come behind the framers, those intellectuals that was in that room, and then come behind them and start lying about what it was they put in place, because they were very clear about what they put in place. And you can't say things like what I'm hearing them say. Alan Dershowitz has said, and I don't know if this is any better than what Tribe has said, because Tribe has said things that, I mean, what that statement Tribe said is absurd. But Alan Dershowitz has said that in order to have impeachment, you have to have a charge of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors, and even said recently that impeachment is a very difficult proposition. That's both. Look, folks, I got to tell you something. I'm offended by these kinds of statements. I'm offended on behalf of the framers of the country, because I don't think we can allow these kinds of comments to go unchallenged by the person that spent the time in their room to put this document together, and then have it treated so transient and lightly by those who claim to be interpreting the document in front of the whole nation, and they take their word for it. I don't take their word for it, because I don't have to take their word for it, because I know what the document says, and I studied the document and have a degree in the document. I know they're going to say, well, you know, the claim that people make is that not all degrees are created equal. Well, I don't know. maybe that's true, but they get you in the same doors. And you could say Eastern is not the same as some of the other institutions, but I'm from Eastern, and I will tell you something. I'm challenging all of them. Those at Eastern too, but it doesn't stop at Eastern. I'm challenging all of the scholars in this area here. I have the same degree. If you have a degree in this area, I have the same degree you have. Now, if you think that you qualified to come behind anything I say about this document, your training supersedes my document, my training, I have got to see that. I mean, I'm not from Missouri on a lot of things, but I'm from Missouri on that. And on that, you got to show me. And I have to tell you something, I don't think you can do that. Now, you can prove me wrong. I'm making this claim publicly. And I'm challenging all you scholars out there. The TV scholars, that's what I consider Alan Dershowitz, Lawrence Tribe, and Jonathan Turley, because I just can't tolerate some of the things that they say. They make a lot of errors in what they're saying on television. When I hear a person that claims to be a constitutional scholar say what Tribe said, I don't consider that you to be a scholar to be said that. And then when I hear Dershowitz saying that you have to have treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors in order to impeach, I can't consider Dershowitz to be a constitutional scholar either, because no constitutional scholar will say that. Now, if you scholars out there are saying that, you got to see me, because that is absolutely absurd. I'm the only scholar in this country that's ever talked about something that's very important to understand about the Constitution, and that is the geography of the document. Because that tells you a lot about the intentionalities in that room when they were laying this document over one part at a time. After finishing up part of the Article 1, they then worked on Article 2. They were putting it to bed seamlessly, one at a time, and going on to the next part. And I will tell you that when they placed Article 2, Section 4, and Article 2 only has 4 sections to it, when they put together Article 2, Section 4, they were very clear about what Article 1 had said. That's clear. They were clear about Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, which says, and I quote, I'll leave some of it out because it's not relevant to this conversation right here. I'll leave some parts of it out, but just a part that doesn't apply to this conversation about impeachment. But what it says that the House, I'm skipping over some parts there, so it's like 3 dots you put there, and it'll skip some of the language that's not relevant to what we're saying at this point about it. The House should have the sole power of impeachment. Now that contradicts what Lawrence Tribe said, that impeachment has not occurred until the matter is referred to the Senate. The Senate is not even involved in that. And what I find a lot of them doing, and this is abhorrent to me, and I will not allow them to do it while in my presence and get away with it, because I take what the framers did in that room very seriously, almost to the point sometimes where I hear what they say, I'm almost in tears by the time they get through. Because I think we have to take the Constitution of the United States very seriously in this country, and they're not doing that. And I don't want to get too emotional about this, but this is very serious when you start messing with a document that's supposed to be the document that governs the entire country. And if we don't respect that, then we are a country that's heading toward chaos.
I'm not going to try to go too far off a tangent, but I'll try to make a point here. Hopefully it makes it pretty quickly. I watch all these cop auditors show, videos on YouTube and on YouTube as well as Facebook. And a lot of the critics are people who stop, they are trying to criticize the auditors. The auditors are the ones who put the cameras up and they have the cops come up and say, let me see your ID. And, all that, and they always say, well, you got the cop supporters always saying, well, just submit, give your ID.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
we want to be helpful to the police and all this, but they don't realize they should because it's popularized on TV show, the Law and Order. It's an adversarial relationship. The judicial justice system. You have the prosecutor and the cops on one side and the defense on the other, and you don't know what they're coming up to you for. So, but the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, has got to be at the forefront of every time you talk to anybody in government. Anytime you cannot
You're making
for
a
1
good
minute
point.
to give up anything.
You're making a good
Anything.
point.
Yeah.
John, you're making a good point. The Constitution has to be maintained, and it's the responsibility of every citizen to see that that is in fact done in all situations, public and private. This idea that you have not done anything and therefore you have nothing to hide is not the issue. The issue is, what does the Constitution require as far as the interaction between the citizens and government? Because the Constitution is a document that is intended to restrain government. And if you in fact allow it, and this is what I see going on right now in the country, by the way, if you allow it to not act in that manner in one particular corridor in which you are interacting with the government, and is not prescient in that particular arena, you'll find then it goes into other areas, and before you know it, we have right now, where you have people telling us that the law is what we say it is. And there are people, by the way, on the Supreme Court who believe that as well. They rule as if they believe that the law is what we say it is. They even do that's. I'm going to get around to this in our discussion today, because that's what's happening with Donald Trump right now. And I'm going to show you in the Constitution that what they're doing, the assumption is that the law is what they say it is. But I'm going to read to you what the law is based upon what the document itself says. Because we've got to stop this expansiveness where we expand what the law is to the point where we've abrogated the Constitution of the United States and not only put it into exile, but act as if the document never did even exist. And canceling out the framers is really a problem, because the framers were trying to put something in place for themselves and also creating for the posterity, and that can be done if we in fact take the document seriously and do not allow this continued encroachment upon that which is written explicitly in the Constitution of the United States. The document says what it says, and it is very explicit in the expressed powers that are in that document. And so to say that there are implied powers, there are no implied powers in the Constitution. The powers are explicit and expressed. There are some implications of the language of the Constitution, but you have to understand that from the standpoint of the inferences. I'll get to that as well when I get to the 14th Amendment, Section 3. The 14th Amendment, by the way, is the longest amendment in the document. And when I get to it, I want to talk about that in terms of what they think they can do in terms of using it to exclude Trump from running for the presidency, if they can make him a felon, or they can make the claim and make it an indictment based upon this felonious assault upon the institution of the presidency, by saying the president was involved in an insurrection on January the 6th. And they want to use insurrection because they want to then apply, if Trump was involved in that on January 6th, they want to apply the Amendment 14, Section 3 of that amendment as a disqualifier. I'm going to show you something here in this document. I'm going to stop as I read it so I can show each part in terms of what it requires. But you people in Washington, I'm going to tell you right now, every one of you in Washington that's working on these claims right now, each one of you is a criminal. Each. This is criminal behavior on the part of the legislative body, and each one is involved in that, including the January 6th committee. I think there were 10 of them that was involved on that committee. Benny Thompson from Mississippi was the co-chair with Liz Cheney. They wanted to make sure there was a Democrat and a Republican, so that it would not seem to be partisan. When it was partisan because of what they were doing here, they both had the same aim. I wrote about it today. I wrote about some of it today on my post in terms of another 2 parts, this 3-part series I'm doing starting today. I'll be writing about this until the 5th of November of next year, because I've got to continue to write in the public for clarification for the 5 or 6 people reading my post, so that they can talk to 5 or 6, and they can talk to 5 or 6 until everybody is hit in the nation. If enough people tumble over this information, which nobody else in this country is talking about, then we can reach the whole country over a period of time. But I'll be writing on this every day until that time comes up, because this is it. You know, they have their song, "This is it, this is it." We have reached the place where the founders wrote in the writing of the 2 documents, the founding document of the country, Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution of the United States 11 years later, the document to govern the country, they drafted in 1787, 11 years later. Those 2 documents are called calls to arms, ARMS. Both of those documents are military documents. That's how the framers felt about this.
Then again, okay, I wonder though, see what happens if the military is supposed to represent the people. All these agencies, the FBI, the NSA, there are things that I don't know where their loyalties lie. So that's who you got to deal with. Now, I think I could just see possibility. You might have a segment of the military. See, a segment of the military is going to be always on board with the established, political people.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always going to have a portion. I'd say 60% roughly. You're going to have maybe the remainder of people who are kind of lukewarm or somewhat, and then the lukewarm towards the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the people. So I mean and I don't even want to hazard a guess because I don't know the military, but I just from what I've heard of people coming out of the military, their expressed opinions. Some are very solidly on the left of the government, no matter what the government does. So now you have all these other NSA, all these organizations, which I sincerely doubt any of them are concerned about the U.S. constitutional rights of the individual citizens. So it's going to be this is going to be a real hard fight if we have to go that route, because we don't know which direction who to put. We basically have to assume we have to distrust everyone.
Yeah, John, the military, a standing military was a concern that the framers had. They did not trust a standing military. And I want to make a point here that I haven't made before, but I need to make this point. We all know that Washington rode back to Mount Vernon twice. But in riding back to Mount Vernon the first time, which was after the Revolutionary War had come to a close in 1783, Washington was challenged by the military that he had led. Because what they wanted to do now that the war was over, they wanted to go into where the government was, where they had suffered for 7 years out there not being funded, not being paid, and not being appreciated they wanted to go and use the military that had won the Revolutionary War and ride against the government and go in there and take what the government owed them because the war had come to a close based upon their effort, and any power that fell into their hands was because of the military, and the military wanted to be compensated for it. And would have done that, but Washington stood in the gap and stood against a military. That's what's happening in a lot of other countries. Washington stood against that and spoke to the persons that were organizing that and told them that that which they had fought for, showed them the tremendous things they had done to create, help bring about the independence of the country, but then to act tyrannical would be to take all the honor of what they had done, with all that suffering they had done. And it's amazing what they did under the conditions they did it under, and then to suborn that to this behavior would take away all the honor they had won. And Washington spoke to the troops respectfully, and because he had been the commander that out there with them, suffering what they had suffered, and they had seen Washington not asking his men to do anything that he didn't do himself. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I don't think we understand Washington enough. We don't talk about him enough. This was an extraordinary man. And it hurts me almost to tears when I see them putting anyone above him, because Washington stands alone. And if we had any sense of Washington, they never would have put anyone up there on that Mount Rushmore with Washington, certainly not on the same side. But there are four up there. And that, to me, is a certain amount of misunderstanding of Washington's role, singularly the greatest president this country's had. And you have to single him out because because here's the reason. No other president we've had, not one, could have done what Washington did and brought this country into existence. No other president could have done that. Not the Indian fighter, the seventh president of the United States who was elected in 1828, not Andrew Jackson, because that hardship, that fight that had gone on, although Jackson was involved in the fighting in New Orleans when the British were on the end of being forced out of here. On the tail end of the War of 1812, Jackson was playing a role in that, but that's not the same thing as what Washington had incurred starting in 1776, when the whole British Empire was arrayed to stop this, because if they don't stop it at that point, the whole empire was would be under attack. And these upstarts had to be stopped. And they threw the whole British Empire behind the might of that to stop it. And 7 years later, Washington just simply would not quit. We have not had a commander-in-chief like that since. And Washington, therefore, to me, and I don't think any scholar is going to come behind me and say differently than that. They may write it, but they're not going to come behind me and verbally say differently in public. Washington is singularly the greatest president we've had. And I have to say this too. This idea of great presidents, you can forget that. This is not even the intentionality of the framers. And the reason why they entrusted so much power to the president, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, singularly the executive office holder of the United States. The only reason they did that was out of the trust of George Washington. If it had been anyone else of these other presidents, they would never done that. We would never trust them to the point of giving them that much power. But the executive branch of government is one person. And somebody got to ask the question at some point, why is that? And the reason why that is because it was George Washington who, in fact, placing that particular care of the country in George Washington's hands. Deservedly so. And that process would have been to demean the people out there. Some of them that were fighting didn't have any shoes because they were not funding them the way they should be funded to out there. People wearing rags on their feet. You could track some of Washington's men down by the amount of blood that was left in the snow. This is the kind of thing that went on back in that time period. I take that very seriously. And so I see these cowards that we have in government that's not worthy to touch the garments of the framers, using the document as if it's a rag. When that's a governing document of the country, the founding document of the country, that put all that time into from May 25th, their dates, not mine, but I'll give you their date, May 25th, supposedly it started May 14th, but even there were people that had arrived just like they arrived on January the 6th before the 6th. They had arrived even before that because Madison got there earlier than that. But it was supposed to start at May the 14th, but they didn't have a quorum, so it starts on the 25th. So their dates in the history books is May 25th, 1787, and September the 17th, when they adjourned in the same year. Now, in the adjourning of that, Washington is, I think everybody in that room, I just have to say this, I think everybody in that room knew that when they made the executive branch the single office holder, I think they pretty much were clear in that room that that's going to be George Washington. Nobody in that room was doubting that if they're going to have the first president, the man that had brought this country into existence. And I've been wrestling with this question in myself, though. This question about, the question is which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I raised that question in this case right here to say, was the country conceived by the writings of Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, pretty much, and endorsed by some additional parts that were in fact put in and some taken out at the Continental Congress? Is that when Abraham Lincoln was saying, conceived 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Is that the conception of the country with the document itself, or is the conception of the country in the document that creates the frame to which the country will in fact operate? I mean, which is the conception of the country? Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. If you start there, then you're saying with the writing of it. But is it really conceived at that point, or is it conceived in 1783 when the war is over and then the conception becomes reality because now that which they were fighting for has been ordained? Or is it with the Constitution being drafted in Philadelphia in 1787? I'm wrestling with that question right now in terms of the conception, the country being conceived. I mean, that's one of the questions we wrestle with in terms of the conception of the child. You know, when does conception start? And you can wrestle with that and claim all kinds of things with it. Everybody have a different view of it, and even some saying, even up now they're saying even up to the time of birth and things of that sort. But I think, well, we'll argue that at some other point. But I know that when they put the executive branch together as a part of the government, I know that what they were doing there by having the single office holder, because that's not what they started out. They started out talking about having a consortium so as to balance out the power of the executive branch so that it could have a meeting of the minds with multiple people there, so that in the agreement about how they are to ferret out the carrying out the executive branch, the law enforcement branch of the government, how to in fact do that. There was going to be a committee a committee to discuss that in order to carry it out. So the check and balance inside of the executive branch as it already occurred in the congressional branch. But I really think in that room, if you read closely the notes of James Madison, the lawgiver, I can tell you that they were, every time they got to talking about committee of the executive branch, more than one member, I can see them almost looking, every time they said that, they kept looking in that chair. It's almost like some of, how your conversation wanders off into, you start wandering off into oblivion. It's like you're going off into infinity and your voice is trailing off. It's like they're in that room saying, and the executive branch, and it's like they're saying, because they good with the idea of committee, but now they're not saying committee so much. And what's changing their mind is that they know that they're talking about George Washington. I'm not sure how George Washington felt about it, because George Washington, two things about George Washington that needs to be talked about. I'll say this, to make this point, it's not my conversation. George Washington was a sexist. And I think that's why he didn't think that, I think that's why he made the mistake with the traitor. The one that was in the military, and then went over to the dark side, went over and went on the side of the British. Benedict Arnold was right there as a major soldier, and went over and betrayed the revolution. Now, I think if you read the documents very closely, you'll see that Benedict Arnold married a loyalist. But George Washington, I think when I read the autobiographies of George Washington, one thing that jumped out at me is that Washington could not conceive that a woman would be capable of leading her husband in that direction. But she was really the catalyst for Benedict Arnold. I mean, some of it was him having some umbrage with being overlooked and denied things that was due him based upon his contribution. And he certainly had been overlooked in ways in which he should have been rewarded and given higher rank than he was, particularly in the Battle Ticonderoga in New York, but I think there's a part of it. But you see somebody talking in his ear also. And George Washington could not conceive. When they went to the home, she's crying and she could not believe her husband was doing that and blah blah, all that stuff. Those tears were to cover up her own role in it. And Washington fell for it. That's my analysis of it. And you scholars can take what you want from that. My analysis of it is that she was involved in that as well. But George Washington couldn't conceive of that. Now his modesty was part of his makeup, but his sexism was part of his makeup also. And I have read Martha Washington's comments that gives credence to that. Somebody ought to read the things that Martha Washington wrote. But this man stands singly alone. Now, the President of the United States needs to be understood. The executive branch of government needs to be understood. He is singly the President of the United States. He is the second branch of government. We owe that to the greatest president, and really the only great president this country has had. Politicians are not intended to be great. They're intended to be more or less on the government is to be small and non-intrusive, and therefore the president was not to be intrusive in the lives of the people either. They were just simply to be the ones that's enforcing. The president was to enforce the laws passed by Congress. Congress passed a law, the executive branch of government, the president then enforced the law. Very, very mundane, very simple parts of roles to be carried out by the different branches. This branch does this. Therefore, this branch does the other thing. And this branch does the third thing. The law making, law enforcement, the law enforcer, and the law interpreter. Very basic kinds of things. So the executive branch of government is just to enforce the laws passed by the Congress of the United States. But in the singularity of that role, and being the only office holder that is the executive branch, in terms of the President of the United States being the executive branch of government, with the only duties in the executive branch of government. Is that true? The only duties that are in the executive branch are inherent in the President of the United States. There are no duties really. If you want to bring someone in the tent because he's more of a problem outside than he is inside, you bring him in and make him vice president, as Kennedy did Johnson. But Johnson didn't have anything to do with it. He didn't like the idea of being in a role where there was nothing to do. There's no role for the vice president to play except being the person that stands in the place when the president is incapacitated, or in the case of 4 different presidents have been assassinated, then the vice president stands up. But the only role the vice president plays officially in the Constitution is to be the president of the Senate. And he doesn't even vote in the Senate as the president of the Senate unless there's a tie in the Senate between 50 members on one side of the issue and 50 members on the other side of the issue. Unless that is a tie, he doesn't even have a role in that. He just sits there. It's the president that's the executive branch, and that's because of George Washington. They gave him they gave that branch that authority. Now I make that point because I want you to understand something. That when the president does something in the executive branch of government, and because the powers are horizontally separated, this one, and this one, 3 different branches, and they're separated, there's a hedge around the authority of each branch. And to contravene the separation, there must be a authority delegated to take away what is a hedge around each branch of government, and unless that hedge is removed, then that hedge remains. I'm going to read it to you because now the scholars understand this. I'm going to read it to you. And I'm going to show you two things today. And I'm going to read it real slowly so that even the scholars can understand it. I'm going to read Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, first of all. I'm going to read it real slowly because I want you to understand what I said earlier about there are no implied powers in the Constitution, but there's language that is implicitly understood by the framers that has to be understood by those who are now interpreting what they meant. The powers are not implied, but there's implicit language in the document. The idea of implied powers is really Hamilton, who wanted to expand the federal power, and that's where that idea comes from. I disagree with Hamilton. I respect Hamilton, but I think Hamilton is a little bit dangerous here. And so I'm going to read Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. I want to read something and want to read this real slowly so that we'll all get what is happening here. Because something is happening here that's very major. And here's what Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 says. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office. Now, why is that? Because impeachment is a political process. But what it does, because it is a political process, and because the process starts out with the members of the House, and members of the House are the members directly, the representatives of the constituents of the states. And so therefore, if the constituents impeach, and then the states will validate the impeachment, and in addition to that, the claim that which is written in Article 2, Section 4, specific to the removal claims that have to be made in order to remove the president, then given all these circumstances, then if the person is convicted based upon all these circumstances I just mentioned, then that hedge around the president is then removed. And then it says this then. Cases of judgment in case of impeachment shall not extend further than in removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted, this part, shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. I want all you scholars to listen very carefully. This language is very important. None of you understand it. If you did, you would have said something about what they're doing right now to Trump. And I can tell you don't understand it because of what I what I heard you say in interviews. Listen carefully. Pick up at this point right here. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Now, why did the framers put Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 in the Constitution of the United States? Let me tell you why. It's because of the separation of powers. And because the corridors of power is how you are, in fact, restraining it so it doesn't go out of control, to remove that hedge where each one is in his own department, to remove that is very serious, because if it breaks down, one of the policies inside the government gains too much power and can suborn the others because it has more than 1/3 of the power. So the hedge has to be removed cannot be removed for light and transient reasons. In order to remove it, the executive branch, for example, and make the executive branch liable in a court of law, you must first of all take away the office of the president. Listen to me carefully here. The office you must remove the office. That's what's going on here. You must remove the president from office. I can tell you didn't understand that in 1974. Because when they overthrew, and that's what it was, by the way. I've been saying this for about 20 years now, 30 years now. I've been saying this ever since 1979. After I read H.R. Haldeman's book called The Ends of Power, one of the president's men, one of Richard Nixon's men. After reading reading Haldeman's book, The Ends of Power, I could see that what had happened was with Richard Nixon. I have to go into this sometime in the future. I have to go into this in terms of what really happened in 1974, because it's not been clearly understood what really took place there. A lot of interesting things happened there. But what I'm getting at here now is I can tell that they didn't understand the Constitution, because they thought that once Richard Nixon was removed from office under the cloud of impeachment, was not impeached, but the threat of impeachment and removal. There's a threat of being removed under the terms of the impeachment and conviction clause of the Constitution found in Articles 1 and 2. Nixon resigned before that. Now, after he resigned, and I hear all these silly politicians trying to take Donald Trump's place, trying to act like that they are respectful of the Constitution, respectful of the man, talking about they'll pardon him. Pardon him for what? And pardon him why? What Donald Trump did as president, you idiots, the impeachment that you tried to bring about, the first one was impeachment that occurred after really the first impeachment would have been in March of let me get it right. In March 2020, that's very important to understand that date too, because when the impeachment in March failed to bring about conviction, then they came up with COVID. And you need to understand what I'm saying there about that. I won't go into that now. I go to it in a future setting. But the impeachment did not result in conviction, and that's why they had to impeach him a second time. Because they thought what had happened when they did it again the 13th of January, and this was January the 13th, 2021, and the man only had at that point several more days in the presidency, but they impeached him again. Why? Because they thought that his support had fallen away enough now so that they could bring about conviction and therefore use that to keep him from running in the future. Because after you impeach, you can then go behind, after you convict, you go behind the person being impeached and convicted and then bar the person running again for for the federal office. But you must impeach and convict first and come back and then just bar the person running by having another vote in the aftermath of the conviction. Then they have the Senate vote again about having where the person cannot run again and hold another office of the United States. They were trying to do that that's why they did the second impeachment, because they realized they had not yet stopped him from coming back in the future. And they intend to do that. Okay, so what I'm saying here is that the Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 demands that the hedge around the president be removed before any legal action can be taken against the president of the United States for anything he did while he was president, because the separation of powers, where the powers are divvied up, where each one of the three parts of the government have 1/3 of the power, so therefore there's no one part of the government, there's a one-upmanship over the other two parts. Now you may say, well, when the court makes a decree, the courts has ordered the president to do something, and the president has had to be compliant. That's because supposedly what is happening there is that the court is interpreting the law, the Congress, the law, and they've spoken, and this is an interpretation of it. So there's 1/3 doing the interpretation, 1/3 making the law, and 2/3 the government has spoken, and that overwhelms the president that must in fact comply with the verdict of the court. Although in one case in 1832, Andrew Jackson tells John Marshall the court has made its decision, not letting Marshall enforce it. If the president did that today, he would be impeached and probably would be removed and on conviction of the impeachment charge at that point of having exceeded his authority. If we understood the Constitution, we'd understand that the president has the authority to carry out enforce the law. He is not to carry out that which is unlawful, which a lot of this what's happening right now in the federal government is unlawful. And so a lot of things they're doing is not constitutionally authorized, and to make the president carry that out is a abomination, again, getting the president to do some things that cannot be done legally because it's not constitutional. You see, everything that's constitutional is not necessarily legal, because the legal is what they say. They make the law and they claim this is not it. So they can act as if this does not apply to what they're doing. This applies to everything they're doing. But what they've done here is made two-thirds of what they're doing right now in Washington right now is unconstitutional, as quiet as it's kept. Two-thirds to some people have estimated three-fourths what they're doing is unconstitutional. They just simply have discarded the document and placed in exile, as Andrew Napolitano has said. Wrote a book about it called Constitution in Exile. But okay, we're running out of time here. The Constitution separates the powers, and the president acting as the CEO of the country, there's no statute of limitation that goes out after the president had acted as the President of the United States. There's no statute of limitation that applies to the action that he took when he's president. You cannot wait until he leaves office and then claim that he's now vulnerable to what he did as president. If the claim against the president is not made while he is president, and the hedge from around his actions are removed through the impeachment process, through impeachment and conviction, based upon the claims in Article 2, Section 4, then that cannot be brought later on against the President of the United States. That's as true based upon the document as it can get, and there's not one scholar in this country that can come behind that and say anything different. And if they try to do that, they're wrong. And they will not do it here and not get challenged. Because the document is very clear, they understand it. And to pardon Nixon as Ford did was unnecessary for this reason. They did not impeach Richard Nixon, and therefore he's not convicted and removed for that reason, where Nixon, he was running ahead of them and resigned before that occurred. But after he resigned, that is a done deal at that point, because the Constitution doesn't authorize any action beyond that point. And because it's not carried out in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, and Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, and Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, because now that was in fact carried around, the hedge around the president remains. That's as right as rain. I hope you understand some of that. I know it's very complex at some point. It's so complex nobody else understands it. And that's why they're not going to say anything about what I said here today, because I'm the scholar here. And I want them to know that. And now they're going to come behind anything I say about the Constitution and say different. That's as right as rain also. What they're doing to Donald Trump is wrong. It's unconstitutional. And I'm going to be going into this, and I'll be saying this hopefully at some point nationally, hopefully before some of the bodies on the federal level, because they have got to know what is required by the document, and that they don't know. Okay, we're going to get back with this again next week. We talk about some of the aspects of that as well. Didn't get to all of it today. We'll do the rest of it next week, hopefully get through it next time. Until next time, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.